And welcome to the Big Dig Live Monday night edition. As we have kind of slid things around, and tonight, welcome my co-host Tyler West. You even get this one. There you go. There you go.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so Tyler, thanks for being with us, and we thank everybody who comes in, listens to us, and hangs out with us tonight. Tonight we are picking up. Now, get this. So we are in part 5. I'd ask you all offline, or maybe even last week on the show, or what part are we on? Because I don't know what happened, but anyway, I did discover that we are on part 5. So this is part 5 that we're doing tonight. 5. So Tyler, how you been, man? How's your week been and all that?
Oh, it's been good. It's been good. Had a good weekend. Storms, of course, rolled through the past, 24, 36 hours. And
Yep.
that was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
But no, it's been good. Work's a little stressful today.
Yeah.
But, sometimes days are just like that.
Manic Monday, right? Manic Monday.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. They're saying we're supposed to get a lot more rain from what I've heard. I don't know if that's changed or not, but that's what I'd heard recently, that there's going to be a lot of rain coming through over the next week or so. Now, I don't know how
I looked at the forecast.
Yeah, take a look at the forecast so we can forecast it. So for me, me and my wife Miranda, we went to a concert with my mom, Carolyn. Hey, mom. By the way, we went Saturday night and got to see Casting Crowns, along with our messengers and another lady. I cannot remember her name. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, the concert was really good. I think, when it comes to Casting Crowns, I don't know of a more down to earth leader of a group besides, was it Mark Hall? I think's his name.
Yeah, I think his name is Mark Hall.
He is just, he's just down to earth. You can tell he's down to earth. This was their last show of the tour, and it was in Beaver Dam at the amphitheater, and they were heading back to Atlanta. That's where he's from anyway. And he was going to lead worship the next day at his church.
Yep.
So, I mean, they're all about it. They're all about keeping it the right way,
Well, I mean, that's what they originally were just kind of the church worship band.
Yeah. Youth band, actually. It was a youth band. And he told the whole story, which was really interesting. And how they got discovered. So I'll give you the abbreviated version. So basically, he was a youth pastor, and he was kind of grooming up these kids to learn how to play instruments and so forth. And they created their own worship band. The parents of the youth, eventually, they started hearing the actual lyrics to the songs, and they're like, this is really good stuff. And so the parents wind up forking over the money, sending them to a studio to get it get it recorded. Yeah. All right. Well, then somehow, I don't know all of it, but there was a kid in the youth group that was heading off to basketball or football or something camp on a university campus. And so he's got this CD, and lo and behold, the lead singer for Sawyer Brown was coming to the university, I think, to visit his son or daughter, and their paths cross, and this kid winds up handing him the CD, and because Sawyer Brown's lead singer was on his way down to Miami or somewhere south in Florida to meet with Stephen Curtis Chapman about starting a record company. So he's got the CD in hand. He gets back in his vehicle and he's heading south to meet Stephen Curtis Chapman. He throws the CD in and hears it, and they're the first one that signed on that particular label. It's really interesting how
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And here's a little factoid. Do you know where Stephen Curtis Chapman was discovered?
Where? I'm not exactly sure, but he's a Kentucky boy.
He is. He's from Paducah area. He was discovered at Opryland.
Really?
He was an Opryland performer. And guess who discovered him?
Not the Cumberland Boys.
No, Bill Gaither.
Really?
That's what I heard. If it's true,
Because I know the Cumberland Boys were big Opryland.
Yep,
Thing.
they were.
I knew two of those guys. Two of the Cumberland Boys are from Scottsville.
Oh, right on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you never know. It's just kind of a small world, and how God directs our paths. That's for sure. And I think with Casting Crowns, he said I write a lot of songs about pain, and he says, and I try to help us all get through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, man, that's an accurate depiction of a lot of their songs. If you listen to their songs, their lyrics are really good. And he was saying he was dyslexic and he was ADHD, and he said the one thing I could do was I seen pictures. So in other words, what he was trying to convey, he would see it in a picture form, and he said, now if I can put words to the picture that I see,
right,
and that's kind of how he started writing. So it's interesting, but great concert. Mom, I think, had a good time, and we all had a good time. And then we turn around, and the next night we're at our home church, Hillview, that had comedian Tim Hawkins there. excellent show, if you will. He's funny as all get out, and he's very quick witted, and it's nice to be able to go and hear a comedian that is not dirty and this, that, what you call it, explorative words all the time or whatever.
Expletives.
Thank you. It was clean, and it was, but it was hilarious because he just looks at things around him and finds humor.
We actually, the last time I saw Casting Crowns was down in Hendersonville, and Tim Hawkins was the same. I saw Tim Hawkins in Hendersonville, but it's been many years.
Yeah.
But we love some of his songs. I know he's got some great comedy, but he's got his Chick-fil-A song is one of my favorites.
He had all kinds of them, man. He was rattling off stuff.
My favorite one's the Fire Ant song. I don't know if you've ever heard the Fire Ant.
Didn't hear that
song.
one. Didn't hear that one. So
you need to listen to the Fire Ant song.
Yeah. But anyway, it's been a whirlwind, over the two concerts back to back like that. But we had a great time, and it was good to spend time with my wife, and we had a babysitter here for them last night. So it was nice to get away for just a little bit.
Good for you.
But anywho, let's see what else is going on. Yeah, so we're still, I guess you call us the new parents of a little puppy, and that's getting there. It's been the challenge. Last week was very challenging, but this week is a little better, and we've kind of got a little more organized, a little more, the dog is growing up a little bit, and kind of sleeping a little better. I say that tongue in cheek because he may stay up all night, who knows, but it is getting a little better and all. So, but he's been a joy, to add to the family and all that good stuff. So anyway, it's been a good week, and Lamar's out tonight. He's helping his son move, I think it is. And so, we'll pray for him and all that. And then he'll hopefully be back. You never know. He may pop in and, at some point or not. It's okay. All right, so let's talk dates for a minute, just so we know. We will be out Mother's Day, May the 14th. We will not have a show, and we're going to be, with our mothers and or our wives and celebrate them for being mothers or whatever. So we're going to do that, and then we will be back for a couple of weeks, and then we'll be up on Father's Day, June the 18th. We'll be out. Because Father's Day. So there you go. Enough said. So now, Tyler, you and I have talked, and Lamar as well. I don't think we've shared with those who watch the show kind of where we're going with all this, and where we're going to. I know we're going to put a pause on this study coming up. Kind of, if you would elaborate a little bit of why we're pausing, and just kind of your heart on that for a second.
Well, I mean, the reality is what we're doing. You've got to break it up to some extent. I mean, consider what you just said earlier. This is number 5.
Right.
And this is, when you put the 4 Gospels together, that's a lot of material.
Yeah, a lot of them.
And so, at session 5, we're just now looking at the wise men
Mm-hmm.
that, are coming after Jesus' birth. So we've gotten into really that much of what we're going to be doing in 5 weeks.
Right, right.
So, I mean, it's just the realistic thing of we've got to be able to get it to a good pause point, and if you will, put a tack in it right there, and put a pin in it, and then we do some other things, and then we'll come back to it.
Yeah,
And the intention right now is for us to get through the remaining of part of the whole birth sequence. We've got the escape to Egypt, which we might get to a little bit tonight. I don't know. It just depends on how the discussion goes.
sure.
I try not to say, okay, we're going to do this much in this night, this much in this night,
Right,
because a lot of times we may find a section that we just want to go a little deeper on, and there may be some questions about.
right.
But the intention is to get through this, to get through the flight to Egypt, and to get through. There's one instance as an adolescent, as a 12-year-old boy, that Jesus goes to Jerusalem, and then after that, we're going to, basically put a pin in it, and then we'll pick it back up at some point later, and we'll start at that point with John the Baptist, the actual baptism of Jesus, and the
Yeah,
beginning of his ministry. So it seems like after that 12-year-old event is the best place to stop.
gotcha. So it will not, probably not be tonight. So it'll probably
Oh,
be
no, no, no.
more likely either by the end of next show or maybe into the next show. We don't know, but probably the next show probably will have
Soon.
a landing spot for a while, and then we'll
Soon.
pick up some other stuff and talk about it. It's not like we're just going to fall off the face of the earth. That's not what's going to happen. Shout out to Ann Eileen who come in too, also watching on Facebook. So thank you for doing that. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is so I've got a friend that I played some music with. He is local here in Bowling Green, but he's a regional artist. He's traveled around, some different places, and he's kind of known for being a Michael Jackson impersonator. So he's kind of got that sound or that voice, the R&B sound. But anyway, he's also a brother in Christ, and me and him have sat down together in different times and talked about the gospel and talked about just what Jesus is doing in our lives, etc. And here recently, he has I guess you'd say, birthed a YouTube channel, and I wanted to make it known to you all. It's basically, I'm going to read kind of the description of it that he sent me. And if you get a chance to, if you can write it down or remember it, whatever, by all means, go check it out. Basically, the description is it's basically people giving their testimony of how God has moved for them in their lives. It is to give hope to the hopeless, restoration, love, and Jesus. Channels for everyone, and because we all need Jesus. So he's done some interviews. He interviewed a good friend of mine that I do a lot of work with musically, Steve Tishner, and he's also, he's got some other interviews up there, I think. And so he's just kind of starting this channel out, and I wanted to give him a plug. The name of his channel is called Give Me Jesus TV. So if you type that in your search engine on YouTube, it should pop it up and all. So I will put that in the chat here in just a second so that you all can, you can click on it and kind of have it at your ready. So tonight we always start out with a couple of questions, and so I'm gonna fire these questions out, and then let Tyler chew on it a minute. And while you're doing that, Tyler, I'll try to multitask if I can. I'm not that good at it, but I'll try to type in that YouTube thing in the chat. First question: what's the difference between the temple and a synagogue? And the second question is: synagogues are not even in the Old Testament, but they're everywhere in the Gospels. Where did they come from? So I'm going to cut you loose on that for a minute, and I'll type that in and hopefully try to be a part of this at the same time. So
Okay. So temple versus synagogue, and you may see some cases where they're used interchangeably, but that's not really the case. So the temple, as it existed back then, no longer exists. It was destroyed, um, and hasn't been rebuilt. Pieces of the temple. We hear about the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall. That is a piece that still remains. But of course, you've got a big mosque today that sits where the temple once stood. Um, so that is like that was the primary place for worship, and I think there have been three temples, I think, and then I think it was around AD 70 that the last one got destroyed. Now, the synagogue is really more of a local place of worship. So it's more akin to what we're familiar with churches. And so each of the cities, major cities at least, would have one or more synagogues where the Jewish people would gather, and they would recite scripture and prayers and do those kind of things. Meeting on the Sabbath, and that sort of thing. So that's what the difference is between the two.
gotcha.
Okay.
And let's see.
Where did the synagogues come from? So
Yeah.
it's a good question. It's not one that's easy to answer because we don't really know, but the best evidence that we have, first of all, even though they're not mentioned in the Old Testament, they did exist during at least some of that time period. And so, there's evidence going as far back as 5 or 6 BC that there may have been instances of synagogues. But, obviously it's something that had to grow and develop. And I think eventually, especially with the decentralization caused by the destruction of the temple, obviously it became a very core piece of the Jewish tradition.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Now, the original temple, it was not, it was a tent to begin with. We go back to Leviticus, Numbers. You have the original design of shoot. It's not the temple's not the name. I've lost the name. There's a name for it, and I can't remember the name for it right now. Yeah, I know. It's one of those things right there on the tip of my tongue. But yeah, that was originally the design, and then the first actual temple was Solomon's temple.
Right.
David was the one that committed to building the temple, but Solomon's the one that actually built it.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's where I'm actually reading right now. This over the last couple of days was about the temple with Solomon and all that. Let me pull that down there. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So anyway, like I said, we're going to bring up these questions. They're just random questions I found. That just things to kind of make you think and see what maybe something that we hadn't thought of before or whatever. Also, what I had heard, I think there's a website actually or whatever they're keeping. I guess those that are awaiting the return of Jesus, and that's what their focus is they keep track of where things are on that that timeline that I think what eschatology or whatever it is called, I think. Yeah. And they're saying that, of course we know that everything moves in God's time, not our time, but the walls have been prefabricated for that, the next temple that will be built. So that could, a lot of people say, well, there's not been a lot of action in that regard. Well, it may be that it can go up really quick when that time comes, or whatever. And there's talk of people, they're searching for the red heifer that's
Yeah. Yep.
mentioned and all that stuff. So, it's out there. It's so, it's just nice to keep a watch, not that we're trying to predict anything because, no man knows the hour or the day that Christ will return. And we've got work to do until he gets here. So, that's where my focus is working in the kingdom as best we know how and best way that God tells us to. And I don't, you know, I'm interested in that, but at the same time, it's like I'm more focused on ministering to my community and sharing, trying to share Jesus as best possible.
Yeah, and we've had this discussion before. I have no qualms with eschatology. The thing that intrigues me, and I think this is why study the Gospels can be so interesting when you talk about this, is because one of the things that the Gospels reveals very clearly is how easily it is to misinterpret what God prophesies.
Yeah,
because
right.
that's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
And so even I wonder sometimes a lot of this stuff that we read, whether it be Daniel, whether it be Revelation, how much of it do we really have right? And in what way is God going to surprise us and go, ha, you know,
right.
it wasn't exactly what you thought it was going to be.
Well, it's usually that way, right? With
Yeah.
everything that we pray for or have experienced, you think you might know the outcome of how this is all going to play out, and then it doesn't play out your way, and it winds up, of course, always being better in the end. And it's like we've been more wrong than we have been right. So
Most likely for me, prophecy, the way that it ends up going is something is prophesied, whatever was prophesied happens, and we sit back and go, oh, that's how God decided to do
mm-hmm.
it. You
Yep,
know?
yep. So anyway, that's like I said, these questions are just, like I said, little pop-up questions that just kind of get us all thinking and processing. And I'll give you a sneak peek of next week's questions, and we'll do one or two of them next week. What are the differences between priests, high priests, chief priests, Levites, and scribes? So, or why are there multiple rulers named Herod, and why does it matter? So, just little
The
questions like,
second one's easy.
well,
First one's not so easy.
yeah. So, well, y'all can chew on those this week or whatever, and we'll get back into that part next week. But anyway, we are now going to move on and get into our study tonight. We are in, let me pull it up here. We are in Matthew, is that right? Matthew
Matthew
chapter
chapter
2.
2.
And so I am not Lamar, so my skills at scrolling and all those things are not like his. So I will do my best. And you just take us off there, Tyler, and start us where you want to, and I'll do my best from over here.
So, kind of catching us up, we've already had the birth of Christ. We've had the naming of Christ, and his circumcision 8 days after, and then approximately 30 days after that. And frankly, I'd have to go back and look at my Levitical law to tell you exactly how much it was. But 30 or so days, after his birth, they go to to Jerusalem, to the temple, dedicate him. And then we have the encounter with Simeon and the encounter with Anna. And then from that point, they actually go back to Bethlehem because, frankly, they're not in any condition to travel back to Nazareth at this point. I mean, she's still just, right at a month after Jesus has been born. So, we can expect Joseph's picking up some odd jobs to help make ends meet. But at this point, as we discussed, the last time, they're not in, the stable anymore or in the
Right.
cave. Jesus is not laid in the manger anymore. They've been put into a house at this point. And so we're going to start there. So Matthew 2, chapter 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, and we'll specify this is who is referenced as Herod the Great. But in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." Now, I want to stop here. Um, a lot of times we make assumptions as to the timing of this event. Obviously, we've already talked about and corrected the incorrect perception that the wise men or the magi were actually there at the stable on the night of the birth, like the shepherds were, and that was not the case.
Right.
We're well after it. They're in a house, and so um, the problem is we don't know when these wise men actually appeared. We know a range of time in which they came to Bethlehem, but we don't know exactly when.
Mhm.
So it is probably sometime soon after this 30-day period after his birth. It couldn't have been very long after that.
Right.
So one of the things that you'll see people talk about sometimes, and we'll understand why in a minute, is some people say, well, it could have been up to 2 years after his birth, because some people say that star did not appear until he was born.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, here's the thing that we've got to back up and understand. First of all, this is the only instance we hear of the star. And
Mhm.
there's no commentary from anybody else on this star. Herod doesn't even know that this star has appeared. Okay?
Hmm.
It is entirely possible that only these wise men, these magi, have seen this star. And we try to explain this star scientifically by saying there was some comet back in such and such time, and that must have been the star that they saw, and yada yada yada. But I'm like, you know what? Let's not try and prove it scientifically. Let's go back to, I think of it this way: if we go back to when the Israelites were being led out of Egypt,
Mhm.
okay, do you remember what they followed? Yes, they followed Moses, but what
Right.
did they specifically follow?
It was a star, wasn't it?
It was a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of smoke during the day
Oh yeah, that's right.
that literally moved with them. Okay? So what if this star was only seen by the wise men? And what if it actually moved with them
Right.
and literally came to rest? I mean, could God not do that? What if it wasn't really a star? What if it was really more like that pillar of fire? And this was really the description that they had for it. We really don't know, because this is the only description that we have of this event.
Hmm.
So, thoughts on that?
I
My point here really is to try and break away from the assumptions that we have made around this, what it must have been, how it must have looked,
mhm.
and this is what I think is the most likely reality, is that personally, sometime before Jesus' birth,
Right.
this star appeared to these wise men, and they prepared for their journey, and they followed this star to Bethlehem.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. We know there's nothing that our God can't do.
Exactly.
and he can do it anytime he wants, and so I mean I'm on board with you in that regard. I think the problem with people is we're people, and
Mhm.
we have to have a scientific reason for everything, or a concrete reasoning for whatever it may be. And it's like that fact, if you go by that, that factors out faith,
Mhm.
that factors out spirituality,
Yep.
and you can't have both.
No.
I mean, you can have scientific fact that aligns with spiritual, but we have to know where the source and the genesis of scientific discovery, scientific explanation comes from. You know, was it a comet? I, who knows?
May have been. Don't
Maybe it
know.
may not have been. You
May
know,
not have been.
for all we know, it could have been some angels hovering over the area. It could be anything. But here's what I know with the way I look at this document, talking about scripture, it's historical, and you know, there's too much evidence that points to it being accurate.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's the thing. And here's why people don't believe, or they push it away rather, is because if they give credit and they say, yes, this is accurate and true, then they have to stop and actually look at themselves for the sinful creatures that they are. And that's where I think there's there's the where the rubber meets the road, is because if you give credit to the document, if you believe as the word says, then it should make you self-reflect.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you self-reflect, you're going to see just how sinful that you actually are, how evil of a person you actually are. And then it will thus make a person hopefully turn to Jesus, if their heart is not hardened.
Yeah. Now, and a couple of other things. I mean, again, I did not really take this approach until after a couple of times reading through Exodus and going, oh, wow, what if the star was like this? What if the star led them like the pillar of fire, like the pillar of smoke? The other thing is when you read this, I don't 100% take the scripture literally. There are some things where, it's not exactly literal, but I try to when it makes sense. So, for example, it talks about these wise men from the east. And of course, they had to be really from the east, because when you talk about Israel, when you talk about Jerusalem, there's not a whole lot of anything to the west.
Except water.
Except water. Exactly. You've got, the Mediterranean Sea over there. So these magi come from the east, somewhere across the Jordan. We have no idea how far across the Jordan. We have no idea how long it took them to come, but it could have been a very long time, as we'll see here shortly. But the other thing is they came from the east, but then it says we saw his star in the east.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't see it in the west, which would be the direction they would be going. They saw it in the east. And so again, it makes me wonder is if this was something that they saw wherever they were at and they literally followed it. And it came to rest. Now, again, they come to Jerusalem. So they go, they ask, where is he who's been born king of the Jews? We saw a star in the east and come to worship him. Okay, so when Herod the king heard this, who he was not really king, we're not going to get into all of that, but when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And why was Herod troubled? This is a threat to his throne.
Sure, exactly.
Okay, his throne that he's kind of taken illegitimately. So, gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. That's straight prophecy. So, Herod secretly called the Magi, or the wise men, and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. That's the other thing, is the star appeared. It wasn't already there, it appeared.
Mm-hmm.
And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go search carefully for the child, and when you have found him, report to me so that I too may come and worship him. Yeah, who believes that?
Right, exactly.
After hearing the king, they went their way, and the star which they had seen in the east went on before them until it came and stood over the place where the child was. So again, this is another example. They're being led by this star, and this star is moving contrary to any of the other celestial objects.
Mm-hmm.
It literally leads them from Jerusalem, where they were at talking to Herod, just a little bit south to Bethlehem, and it comes to stand, you know.
Right.
So it's got to be low in the atmosphere. It's not like any regular star or anything like that. So they come to Bethlehem, um, and it came to over the place where the child was. Okay. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. After coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned by God, well, you know what? Let's hold on to that for a second. Okay, so much like the shepherds, they're in awe and they're worshiping this child.
Right.
And they give him gifts of gold, purity, frankincense. That was a spice that was actually used for burial, as well as myrrh was used for burial, interestingly enough.
Foreshadowing?
Quite possibly so.
Hmm.
But they were also very expensive gifts. These were
Right. Yeah.
things that could have been sold for quite a price.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what Mary, Joseph, and Jesus did with those things from there, don't know. Don't know if they used it to support themselves for a period of time. Don't know if maybe it was held on to and supported his ministry at some point. Don't know. Whatever happened to those things. But having been warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi left for their own country by another way.
You know what I find interesting, and maybe I'm dismissing it, but is okay. Here's three wise men, and when you look at that time period, women were considered less than.
Mm-hmm.
So everything was man driven.
Mm-hmm.
And here's three wise men that are going and being having I guess a good perspective about, just like, guys are not the best gift givers. We don't think the way that, say, our wives do, or someone like that. Someone, for instance, if someone's having some type of birthday party, the women go out and they get thoughtful gifts, etc., etc. Guys, we try to do that, but we're just not as good at it. And I'm thinking, here's three wise men. Automatically, by culture, women are less than, and they're going and bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I know they're giving it to this baby, but at the same time, it's kind of elevating, in a sense, I think, Mary's stature, not just as just a woman, or a young woman, that is, but you know, the mother of a king. you know.
And I think that that was predicted with the first visit of the angels. And here's what I want to make clear: is Mary to be honored? Absolutely. Is she to be deified? No,
No.
no, not at all. And unfortunately, that's happened. But to be honored, oh yes,
Yeah.
yes, she's a woman among women. Um, and you're absolutely correct. It is an elevation of Mary.
Yeah.
Um, so basically, the wise men, they don't go back to Herod, as Herod had requested. Now, some people ask why they went to Herod to begin with, and that was just really a matter of respect. They were obviously, well-to-do and probably
Did,
elevated men of some authority, and
did he
so
did he call them though? Did Herod call them?
no, they went to him to basically announce, we have come into your country. And it was a respectful thing for them to do, to go to Herod
Well,
before they went anywhere
here's
else.
why I say that. If you go back to verse 7, then Herod summoned the wise men secretly.
Yeah, they basically said, they arrived in the east. Where is he? They were asking
Okay,
in
gotcha.
his court. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Herod then summons them, but they were already there in Jerusalem. They they did not go straight to Bethlehem.
Right.
They went to Jerusalem first.
Right.
And that was, again, out of respect, to basically inform them, we've come into your country. Now, if it was just some common person coming in there trading, that didn't matter. But these were men of authority. These were men of stature.
What is a wise man? Is it?
Oh,
I mean, how would
we
you
don't know.
describe what their role is?
We honestly don't know. Some people have speculated that they were, if you will, scientists, kind of like a Da Vinci of their area, wherever they came from, something along that lines. But somebody that was obviously intelligent, that carried authority, that carried respect. But in terms of what they really were, we don't know.
Gotcha.
We don't know. Um, but we can gather some from the fact that, I mean, not everybody carries around gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
That's correct. Yeah.
So
Right.
now they left. They did not come back to Herod. Herod figures this out, but when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him." So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night, and left for Egypt. He remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." So there's a little bit of mixing of timeline here. They go to Egypt, and we don't know really how long they're there. It gets kind of iffy as to when Jesus was born versus when Herod the Great died.
Mm-hmm.
We've got enough to say it was not very long after this that Herod died, so they weren't in Egypt a really long time. But obviously, this whole thing of Herod realizing what happens before Herod dies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the time, just got to keep this in mind as we read this next section. But they flee to Egypt, which I find, a little ironic. But they flee to Egypt and stay there for an unknown period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Then, when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he was very enraged, ticked off, and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi. So this takes us back a little bit to understanding our timeline as to why I think in all likelihood this star appeared to the Magi well before Jesus' actual birth, so that they were following it, because they had to have arrived in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, not very long after that 30 days dedication in the temple. There's no way, logistically, that Joseph and Mary and Jesus would have stayed in Bethlehem that long,
Right.
for 2 years. So that star, did not appear when Jesus was born. That star appeared before Jesus was born and led them there. Basically for 2 years they saw it, and it led them to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem, shortly after Jesus was born.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, so then we get the whole event, the horrible event, because Herod doesn't know what child this is. And Herod doesn't know that this child is actually not originally from Bethlehem, that Joseph and Mary is not originally from Bethlehem, that they're just visiting there. And so Herod, to basically cover his bases, says, okay, they saw it 2 years ago. They came to me. Don't know which one it is. So to make sure that this king does not come to power and take my throne, I'm killing every male child 2 years old and under. This was the way things were in Israel at that point in time. We really don't hear anything else about this slaughter of dozens. We don't know how many were there, but at least dozens probably of 2-year-old and under male boys that Herod just eliminated.
It's unconscionable to me, that type of environment. But that's what, when you go and study any amount of time about that area of the world, I mean, a lot of people say, well, it's savage. I mean, you can kind of look at it how you want to. It's just it doesn't compute in my book. You know what I mean?
Well, we're no less savage. There's some parallels drawn here with abortion, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Not that I want to get off on that subject, but that's savagery of its own kind.
It is 100%. It sure is.
So basically, that happens, and that was actually also a fulfillment of prophecy that, once again, I believe the majority of the Jews missed. The voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. This is, again, kind of that indication we see. We talked about Matthew early on, and how Matthew was very much written to the Jews because he points out all these very specific prophecies tied to the Messiah, tied to these events, and shows how they were fulfilled. So before we move on from there, questions, comments, anything from the peanut gallery?
Yeah, so if you have a question, by all means, type it in real quick so we can address that question. We'll wait just a minute or two here. Probably more like a minute, but
yeah. Well, I'll go ahead. I just want to go ahead and leave that opportunity out there.
Yeah.
Okay. So Herod the Great dies. Now, again, we don't know exactly when he died, um, but it was, again, this kind of ties into, a lot of people think that the birth of Christ was the beginning of the AD time period, Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. That's not really true. Jesus was probably born somewhere in the range of 2 to 4 BC. We're not exactly sure. And a lot of that we can gauge by Herod's death, because we know that Herod the Great, actually died prior to 0 AD. Uh,
Mhm.
so we know it had to have been prior to that point in time. So Herod the Great dies. Behold, an angel appears to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go back into the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Now, you talked a little while ago about the multiple Herods. Well, this is one of them.
Mhm.
So Herod Archelaus is one of. There's Herod Archelaus. There's Herod Philip. There's another. I'd have to go back and look at them. I'll try and have those for the next time.
It's kind of like Caesar's, right?
Yeah, yeah, kind
Yeah.
of, kind of. Um, so basically, comes back into Israel. Archelaus is reigning over in Judea, so he tries to skirt around Judea, and then he gets back up into Nazareth. So we continue on with Matthew 2:22. Then, after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the regions of Galilee and came and lived in a city called Nazareth. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets: he shall be called a Nazarene. Now, it's interesting to note um, that the way Matthew writes this, because Matthew never talks about them coming from Nazareth. Okay.
Hmm.
So the way Matthew writes it seems like, oh, well, they just land in this city of Nazareth without acknowledging that they're originally from Nazareth. Whereas, if I don't know if you can make this flip, but Luke chapter 2,
Give me just a sec. I can get there.
yeah,
Talks amongst yourselves real quick.
Luke chapter 2, verse 39. I can actually read it if it just simply says, they returned to Galilee, to their own city of Nazareth. So it's kind of that thing of, here's Luke talking about, because here's the thing: Luke never says anything about the wise men. Luke never says anything about the flight to Egypt.
Right.
So if you read Luke by itself, you get the perception that they went from Bethlehem back to Nazareth, which is not the case.
Well, and I think we've kind of talked about this in shows past. You've got one that says they all had their, I guess, perspective
Mm-hmm.
of how the gospel was written, how they wrote it, and so I would say, if there's anything, excuse me, if there's anything for me that comes out of this is that they're all four accounts with an emphasis on something in particular. Like what was it, John? I think that we talked about that had kind of listed the. I forgot now what it is. My brain's not working real good, so I apologize for that. But we talked about that in the past, though, how each one is written with a different perspective, a little bit.
Yeah, well, and the reality here, most likely, is that, okay, in Luke doing his research and in Luke spending time, likely with Mary, the mother of Jesus, it may be simply that Mary never relayed the story about the wise men, about the flight to Egypt. And so Luke simply did not have that information. Whereas Matthew probably had his own conversations with Mary. It's entirely possible, I'm not sure it's plausible, but possible that Matthew had conversations with Joseph. Very unlikely with Luke, plausible with Matthew. Um, that you know, Matthew may have had some conversation, and Joseph actually relayed part of this story to Matthew and talked about the flight to Egypt, talked about the wise men. And so Matthew's got it in his gospel, but Luke does not in his. And so it's not that Luke's by Luke giving the perception that they went from Bethlehem back to Nazareth does not mean that there's an inaccuracy. It simply means that in Luke's research, he did not get the information about the wise men and about the flight to Egypt. So the only logical conclusion he can make is they went from Bethlehem back to Nazareth.
I'm going to put this. This is a comment from Mom, and then I'm going to expand on it. So 3 or 4 people can hear a story, and each one may tell it different. Yeah, but I think in this situation, in essence, would you agree these firsthand accounts, if you will, think of them as almost as reporters going to the source of said person or whatever and gaining that information? Is that accurate in what I'm saying?
I would say in the case of Matthew and Luke, that is most likely true because both of them had access to Mary at some point in time. Matthew may have had access to Joseph at some point in time.
Yeah.
And I think you simply have a case of, yes, it's direct reports, but it's simply 2 different stories being told to 2 different people. Not that either one is inaccurate. It's just that one includes this piece of information and the other one doesn't, and this one includes this piece of information and the other one doesn't.
Right.
And
it's like you. If you tell me a story about something that happened, and it's not going to be verbatim what you would tell Lamar.
Right.
There's going to be bits and pieces that are going to be different in each scenario.
Exactly.
Okay, here's a question. If they all heard then, why wasn't it in all?
Because they didn't. They didn't. That's what I'm saying, is that Matthew most than likely had his own conversation with Mary or Joseph in trying to gather this information, and Luke's conversation, which was probably much later, because Matthew was one of the disciples. That's why I say there is a possibility that he had some access to Joseph. But Luke doesn't really appear on the scene until after Jesus' death.
And also, to go along with what you just said, in regards to one if you will, one interview on the front end of the store of the actual happening, and then one interview that's later in the thing. Think of it from that standpoint. If you're talking to somebody about whatever situation it is on the day of or the day around close by when the actual event happened, and you hear that story, and then if you pause for a few weeks or months or whatever, not that it's watered down, but it's not going to have the same probably detail also because of time of the distance of time from the actual event.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also keeping in mind, Matthew was really tying things into prophetic happenings. And you've got at least 2 events that are part of Matthew's story there that is not in Luke's, that are tied directly to prophecy. One is the slaughter of the children in Bethlehem, and the other is the escape to Egypt. Both of those have prophetic backings to them.
Right.
So it may have been just in those conversations that either A, the questions being asked by Matthew led to these different responses and these different answers, and the questions asked by Luke led to these different responses and these different answers. And that's, and the point I really want to make here is that it's not a problem that, the stories are different in any way. There's no real conflict. It's just that by this one having this information and this one having this information, it can give a perception of discontinuity that really isn't there. That's one of the reasons I like to do it this way, is because you actually begin to see what is the real sequence of events that happened.
Well, it's like this. All right. And I'll use mom as an example. If let's say mom, heaven forbid, her arm got cut off and God miraculously growed it back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If I went to her and asked her questions about that event, and then you come in and ask her questions about the event, our brains are wired a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And yeah, I'm sure there'll be some overlap, but at the same time, your questions are going to be different than my questions.
Yep. Absolutely.
So it goes back to the perspective of, if you will, the reporter. And all, and access, as you said, access to or lack thereof, access, to Mary or whoever.
And I'll explain the Joseph thing just briefly. We don't know really what happened with Joseph. There's enough evidence to say that Joseph had likely passed away prior to Jesus' crucifixion. We don't know how long before. We don't know if it was even prior to Jesus' ministry, which is entirely possible. That's why I say that it's plausible that Matthew may have had some access to Joseph, but most likely Luke did not.
Right. And it goes back, she said, like that last thing she said, if they all heard, then why wasn't it in all the Gospels? It's
they didn't all hear.
Right. They didn't all hear. And perspectives, keep in mind the different angles, if you will,
right.
As you read. That's why I'm glad we're doing this, is because up to, I've known it's out there, the chronological study, but I've never studied it that way until now. Okay. And it's like I said, most of us who are listening or watching this back or whatever, when a new believer, comes into existence, a person gets saved, one of the first things that a pastor or a seasoned person will say is read the 4 Gospels. But that's all they say.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole perspective of how we're looking at this brings the story to life in a very unique way, in that you see how the pieces kind of fit together, and there's not much really discrepancy when you reason it out.
No.
We're not stretching, we're not putting anything in the gospel that's not there.
Absolutely not.
It's just deductive reasoning based on the time period, some dates that we had, that as you shared a while ago, you kind of know when Herod passes away, you can kind of deduce, kind of go back and forth there on get a time frame of the birth of Jesus and so on. So it's not that we're not adding or taking away from the gospel at all. And I'm not saying anybody's saying that, but it's just, it just gives it a better connection point as a storyline as a whole when you look at it chronologically. Let's see what you said.
Yeah, I saw your mother's comment. Big +1. That is actually the primary reason that we believe Joseph had passed away prior to his crucifixion.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Where are we going from here, Tyler?
So, basically, we'll have just the one event really left of his adolescence, the trip to Jerusalem when he's 12, which
Okay.
is an interesting little tidbit of a story. It's kind of an oddity in the mix of all the stuff, but I think it reveals some pretty cool things. We'll do that in 2 weeks,
Yeah.
and then we'll hit the pause button.
So let me reiterate just what he said. So we are looking at right now, as far as the date today is the 8th. So we will not be here on the 14th. That's Mother's Day. The 21st, we will be back. So I will make sure to get that up and out on Facebook and all that, so that you all will be back on normal Sunday evening schedule once we get back on the 21st. Let's see, is there anything else? So yeah, again, if you get a chance, go over to YouTube and check out Give Me Jesus TV. And like I said, that's a friend of mine. His name is Timothy McKinney. He's a good friend of mine. Like I said, lover of the Lord, and wanting to use his platform to share testimonies about people, how God has intervened and stepped into their life. And we'll probably do some collaborations in the future, maybe here or there. We're going to sit down and talk that over a little bit at some point. But yeah, definitely go out and check that out, and let that bless your heart. And then, Tyler, I want to say thank you again for being the co-host and guiding us in this endeavor. I feel like you're kind of like a Captain Kirk or something going
I don't
on
know
here,
about that.
kind of bringing us through
Engage.
and putting it all together here, and kind of keeping us on track. So it looks like we're going to be in Luke 2. That's the next one, I think. Luke 2, where
Actually,
Jesus
mostly Luke
some of
2.
that.
Yeah, starting around, we'll have one little throwback into Luke 1.
Okay.
But mostly Luke 2, about verse 39 and on.
Okay. So if you want to kind of read up on this in the meantime, Luke 1, Luke 2, read them. And that way you're engaged and be thinking about questions and stuff, you might have, if you have any. And we thank you for coming in. We thank you. Be sure to hit like. Let's see, the thumbs up button, the heart button, like, subscribe, pass the word along to friends and family to come in and be a part. And as we do this study and then other studies, like I said, in a couple, once we get through on the 21st, and we're going to hit the pause button on this study for a while, kind of let our brains have a rest, because it's a lot of it's in depth and all that. And we'll still do shows, but we'll figure out something else to do, other topics or Bible discussion or whatever. I've always said I want to get more and more variety too. I want to always keep the main thing. But we can also have some discussions about this or that along the way as well on other topics. So we'll see which way God blows the ship, if you will, and we'll be ready to do that. So, anything else, Tyler, as we close it up today? All right. Well, guys, I thank you all for coming in once again. Thank you all for those who we do recognize and know that there are people, a lot of people actually, that go back and watch it on, I guess, replay or over at Rumble or whatever. So we're in Facebook and YouTube, and so we're grateful for that. By all means, I extend the invite to come in here and hang out with us. And we, like I said, and it's always at the crawler on the bottom of the screen. We're usually here every Sunday at 7. We've got some times off this summer, but for the most part, we're here Sunday at 7:00 with Central Time. And we're going to keep doing that and keep just trying to follow where Jesus takes us. So thank you all again for being on the Big Dig Live, and we will see you next time.